Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us actually in this wonderful house, hosting the Rating Center for International Affairs. My name is Thierry Warren, and I'm an economist and the director of the International Studies Program. So this is actually the first event of a two-day conference. So before going further, I would like to thank the Christian A. Johnson Fund, because indeed, I am an economist, so I have to talk about money at some point. So the chair of the Christian A. Johnson Fund is David Collender, and he gave me actually some unconditional support. I would also like to thank the Rating Center for International Affairs. The director of the Rating Center for International Affairs is Alison Stenger, and I would like to thank actually the advisory committee of the Rating Center, constituted by Professor Mike Williams, and also Charlotte Tate, Martha Baldwin, Caroline Davis. And I have a special thank actually to Janine Podraza, who is the one who took all the tough decisions. I did not, and who is the one who arranged everything. I did not. So please join me in thanking actually all these people. So now it's all about bad news, and we will have an hour of bad news. So be ready, fill up your stomach. So I would like to tell you actually, I feel like a small kid in a candy shop. This is such a terrific honor actually to have Mr. Heikki Oksanen here. He is actually an economic advisor at the European Commission. Heikki actually is from Finland, speaks many languages. So whatever you say, is going to understand it. So be aware. And he has actually a long career in the European arena. If you want to know, so he actually got his education in Finland, in Helsinki University. He's a macroeconomist. He worked during his PhD dissertation on monetary policy issues, then went to fiscal policy issues and population economics, related to fiscal policy issues, related to public finances. Is the one actually, and I'm not exaggerating actually, if Finland is part of the EU, this is actually thanks to Mr. Heikki Oksanen. He was part actually of the mission. And it was in 1991 when he moved actually to Brussels. Also in 1991, actually December, Mr. Heikki Oksanen actually participated to the Treaty of Maastricht. So my students, you should know about that. So definitely, is one of, maybe one day we will talk about, and I hope Mr. Heikki Oksanen as, well, one of the founding fathers, my students, you know what I mean, of the European Union. So this is, I can only thank him actually to be here today. This is just incredible to me. So what's going on this weekend? There is this two-day conference here at Middlebury College. This is really the hotspot of the European economic integration. Well, we have big competitors anyway. At the in Frankfurt, the European Commission, the European Central Bank decided to have a conference this weekend on the 10th anniversary of the euro. This is exactly what we do this weekend here. Why do they do that over there, particularly this weekend? Such a bad timing. They should have asked us. And what's going on too? And yeah, I think it is, yeah. And what's going on? The G20, they had to pick this weekend to meet in Washington, D.C. This is so unfair. Anyway, back in February 2003, people actually had what we call the Directorate General for Economic and Financial Affairs, which is, you would not say that, but I can, which is actually the most important Directorate General at the European Commission. They had a workshop on the internationalization of assets in the EU today and in the future. Think about the financial crisis. So it was back in 2003. And we are actually aware, and I hope you are, because otherwise it's going to be a shock, that it's a kind of a hurricane-like financial crisis, so hold on tight. It's going to get worse. So anyway, Mr. Heikki Oksanen actually has seen a lot of European commissioners, so Yves Thibault-de-Silguy, Pedro Solbes, Joaquin Almunia, and just to give you a quote, and again, I mean, it's to bridge my course and this talk, so I won't tell you the secret. My students will know what I'm talking about. I hope so. It's going to be on the final exam. So on the 24th of October 2006, the EU Monetary Affairs Commissioner Joaquin Almunia stated that the European Union could theoretically take Sweden to court for not joining the euro, despite meeting all the economic criteria. Do you see what I mean? Okay, keep it secret. So Mr. Heikki Oksanen actually is surrounded by fantastic people actually at the European Commission in this Directorate General, Economic and Financial Affairs. Marco Butti, Lars Jonung, Carl Pichelman, they are in contact actually with the European Central Bank, Philip Hartmann, I mean to name one. He has extensively worked actually on top of pushing Finland into the EU. He has extensively worked on pension reforms, public finances, aging in Europe. So, I mean, I have a long list of papers. So he's a real expert. He's actually the focal point at the European Commission when it comes to aging, pension reforms, and the stability of the public finances in Europe. So he knows all the research. He has to. That's his job. And he participates actually into this research. So this is just incredible. So be aware, Heikki does not have any good news. So one, we get old, and there is nothing economists can do about it. Two, aging is bad for public finances, so we should not do that. But I have a very good news for you. Aging does amazing things to wine. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Heikki Oksanen.
Thanks, Thierry, for all these kind words, and thanks for inviting me to this workshop on the 10 years of Euro. I was very glad to receive this invitation from Thierry. We have a whole day workshop tomorrow, and there are many interesting papers. I've read most of them on the flight yesterday from Europe, and it's going to be great. So thanks again inviting me to join this workshop. Thierry gave my CV, or some bits of it. If I may a little bit make one thing more precise, as Thierry somehow made you to understand that I wrote the Maastricht Treaty in Maastricht. That is not quite exactly the truth, but I will tell you, because it was interesting and important for my career. I had started in the Finnish mission in Brussels the 1st of August 91. I was from the Ministry of Finance, and I came to the Finnish mission to look after the Ministry of Finance matters in the Finnish mission. And soon after that, of course, Finland sent in the application to join the EU, and then over the years I was there serving the Finnish government. I was looking at the preparations of EMU, reporting back to Helsinki, and trying to convince the politicians and general public, also by writing some articles in the press, what EMU means. So that was my assignment. And the concrete thing was that in December 91, the European Commission invited 2 officials from the EFTA countries' missions to follow the European Council in Maastricht amongst the journalists. So I went there with my colleague who was responsible for political union, and I was responsible to following what happened to economic and monetary union in that conference. And we were all the time briefed by the Commission spokesman. We were on the phone to Helsinki and so on and so forth. So this was my role exactly on that day. So I didn't write it, but I followed how it was written. All right. Then, as I come from Finland, I appreciate the landscape here. We, even though we are European civil servants, we never lose our roots, of course. And there's one thing which I could perhaps mention here. Finland, as you may remember vaguely, is in between Sweden and Russia, up in the north. And Finland and Sweden, we sometimes have some friendly fights, like in ice hockey and other fields. Here you can see from the slide that at the end I'm going to say something about the Swedish pension reform. And it's going to be some nice words. And you may understand it's not that easy for a Finn to do it. But I will do it because it will be true. So this is the outline of my talk. You have seen it, I guess. And the first point which I want to make goes back a little bit to how the aging problem has appeared in analysis, public discussion, and so on and so forth. It first came as a problem with the post-World War II baby boom. It was seen that those large generation, by the way, happen to be a member of the largest generation in Finland. That was 47. So in that case, again, a personal connection. So it first came as a problem that this baby boom generation was aging and then caused a problem. But if it were only that, it would have been a temporary problem, which fades out. But it was then sometime, probably during the 90s, it became clear, no, it's not only that. There is a much more permanent problem with a low fertility which seems to persist and a continuously increasing longevity which make the problem permanent of course in any sense. So the post World War II generation baby boom is a detail sort of course it affects what is happening now and over the next 20 years, even 30. But it is not perhaps the most fundamental issue which we have at hand. Well, just to make this point, the last point on this slide, in Europe the situation is clearly more serious than in the United States, as you know. So the aging process is not quite as bad as in Europe. And also the pension system is, roughly speaking, just half of what it is in European welfare states, just to make a reference to the situation on this side of the Atlantic. This is the decline in fertility, just to show on this slide how steadily it has come down, and the projections which we use as a basis for trying to foresee the future. Normally, the assumption is that the fertility, the basic underlying fertility, which is in statistical language the completed fertility figures, the normal assumption is that it would stay around the level where it declined roughly around this time. So that is the basics. The one of the two key factors, and of course the second one is the increase in longevity, which is forecasted to be also about 1 year in a decade, and we don't know when it ends. It has to end at some point, but it seems that it is very persistent trend. And these two factors, only these two factors together, this is based on the real data, so that behind this graph, the post-World War II baby boom generation is also in there. These produce this dramatic increase in what we call the old age dependency ratio, that is the ratio of elderly to the, roughly speaking, working age population. So this is where to start any sort of analysis with even with rough numbers. Well, here I go to sort of very immediate implications of the aging process. It should be not too difficult to understand that if the pension benefits and retirement age were maintained, pension contributions would nearly double. And that is certainly something which one can't take as realistic or feasible or desired or expected to happen. It's simply not sort of realistic to make a projection that the pension contributions in European welfare states would increase from the current level of something like 20 plus to more than 40% of the wages. It's not realistic to assume that people would choose this. Rather, it's more realistic to assume that various things will happen, policies will change, pension system parameters will be changed, and so on and so forth, so that the future will be something else, as it really has to be something else. It is not feasible to think that the pension contribution rates would be more than 40% of wages. So this is, in a way, a starting point to motivate anybody, sort of even in the street, to understand that this is a question where there are a lot of options, and one has to open the eyes to look at new policy options to cope with this matter. And try to convince that this is a necessity, and try to convince people to accept that changes have to happen, because one can see that in many places in these recent years, when there have been pension reforms which from this angle are not that radical, but still there have been riots and strikes and whatever, as people have not accepted what the governments have proposed. I don't say that this is only the fault of the people. It can also be the fault of the governments that they have not been able to express clearly enough that there is a necessity to do quite even drastic pension reforms. Okay. Now, I know that I have a very strict chairman here, and I try to stick to the something like 30 minutes. That will also mean that I will skip certain details in the slides, and that was my intention originally. And by the way, these slides will be available on your some sort of net, I don't know. So you will see. You can have a look at them even later. Well, now to the role of the European Union, and here are the basics. it should be understood that social security is mainly in the competence of the member states. So one should not expect too much from the European Union as an organization. This is clearly stated in the treaty. I mention here even some details about it, and just to note, all this is maintained in the reform treaty, which is now pending for ratification. So there have not been any serious sort of even attempts or proposals to change these aspects in the treaty. They are there and they will be there as long as we can see. Still, of course, there is a lot of many things are happening in this field in the European Union, and the European Union has a role in specific fields which are part of the pension policies, so that there is directly binding EU legislation on certain aspects. There are some indirectly binding rules, and then there is a lot of sort of voluntary cooperation to exchange information and reporting and all that, which is of course useful. All this happens, so the question is serious, and it's serious enough that of course European Union has a role, although the fundamental issues belong to the member states. Here is a slide on sorry, it didn't move. On certain areas where there is important EU legislation which is binding, and of course the first one is in the field of employment and social affairs. Of course there has to be, and it's already a long time ago, EU legislation on pensions for guaranteeing portability of pensions. Of course, this is part of the internal market for workers. So that is one field, and of course you can imagine that nothing is clear and ready at once. But even in this field, there is continuous work to improve the situation in this respect. Internal market for financial services, the new legislation on the occupational pension funds, important. The aim being that there can be an internal market in this area of occupational pension funds. That is, occupational pension funds meaning that is the second pillar pensions, which is on top of the first pillar public pensions, which is certainly the main topic in my talk. And this area also belongs to another DG in European Commission, so that's why I'm not, and this talk is not supposed to cover any details on that. But I just want to mention always the fields where the European Union has directly binding legislation. And the third field is taxation. Obviously, there are many issues where the EU legislation has to take care of problems which would arise from tax treatment of pensions, pension funds, and so on and so forth. So this is also an area where legislation exists. But now I go to my own field. Oops. And this is what I now call indirectly binding EU legislation. And the thinking behind this wording is that public pensions are an important item in the government budgets. One can easily say that it is the biggest single item on the expenditure side in government budgets. And of course, if that goes wrong, and that causes a general problem with the public finances, then it falls under the public finance rules. If there is a problem, the EU has a role to tackle it, to say that country A has to change something in order to put the public finances on a right track again. But important to understand here is, of course, that this does not give to the European Union institutions the competence to say what exactly the member state should do to put the pension expenditure on the right track. It can and it has the obligation to say that country A, you have to do reforms in order to cope with the situation. But what exactly, that is in the competence of the member state. So we have the treaty where we have the wording sound public finances, and we have the excessive deficit procedure in the Maastricht Treaty, which is there in order to avoid public finances to go wrong. And we have the Stability and Growth Pact, which gave more content how this is done, and that is then the basis for looking also at population aging related expenditures in the member states, all these projections and so on and so forth, and then based on them give at least recommendations to member states to do something well in advance and not to end up with some sort of crisis situation when everything is too late. Briefly, the recommendations, which are then not sort of binding, but anyway, jointly agreed recommendations, which have been given jointly by the member states at the European Council level, are public debt should be reduced now in order to prepare for the rising expenditures. One should increase employment rates, especially one should increase retirement age in order to help containing the pension expenditure increase. And third, what other type of reforms to pension systems, including pre-funding, reducing replacement rates, and so on and so forth. So this, for instance, in 2001 in Stockholm European Council, the agenda was more or less like this, these three main points. Now, to help to tackle all this, the Commission, and together with the Member States experts, has done 2 rounds of projections of population aging expenditures. The first one in 2001, second one published in 2006, and actually the third one is right now in the pipeline, and it will be coming out next spring. I've right now just during the recent 2 weeks I've seen the first preliminary figures on the expenditure estimates for most of the member states. So the third round is well in the pipeline. So you can always find these documents from 2006 on the web, and I just show you some sort of highlights of it. Of course, as there are so many member states and there are so many differences, we are not going to any detail here. Just a very sort of main features. And here this slide shows that according to those projections, the increase in public pensions as a percentage of GDP would, according to those projections, the increase would be a bit 2.2 percentage points from 2004 to 2050. Right. And just to give the main picture, if nothing else would happen, but just the old age dependency ratio would increase and everything else would remain constant, that would mean that expenditures would increase by more than 8 percentage points. But then there are other factors which go to the other direction. That is, in these forecasts, the employment rates are increasing and the retirement age is increasing, so that the number of pensioners in the age groups above 60 or something are decreasing. So those two factors together make it minus something. And also, according to these projections, the benefit ratios, which is roughly speaking the average pension divided by the average wage, that is also decreasing in those projections, making this negative contribution. So these three factors together make the final result. So this gives an idea of the main factors behind and helps to look more carefully into each of them. Next slide, not to details. Here are the 15 old EU member states. It is not the purpose to look into any individual countries, as we don't have time for it, but just to note that there are large differences both at the initial levels and changes. So the problem is it's not the same across over the member states, but there are large differences, so which then means that to make a meaningful operational analysis always means that you have to look into each member state individually. And the differences between the new member states is even larger in many ways, and there we can see that according to those projections in 2006, there were even reductions in the expenditures as a percentage of GDP, and then I must say that not all these projections should be taken as facts or even well-founded forecasts, because it can be that there are some factors which are not that well taken into account, so that one always has to have a critical look at them and not take them as given. And then, of course, this also means that everybody should be patient and also wait for the next round. It can be that in certain ways the projections become more reliable, which come out next year. Especially the benefit ratios in some countries, according to those projections, they were declining significantly, and there are question marks whether that was anything realistic. It can be that in some countries, especially those projections were made on sort of too mechanically on the basis of a certain interpretation of the existing rules, but one should ask whether those rules are really politically sustainable. So again, this type of data reveals that there are serious questions behind. Yes. All right. So, well, here I raise, in a way, very briefly, the questions whether these projections are biased downwards, and there can be factors which make them to be so. And the potential causes could be that the Ministry of Finance people, it's their job to give an interpretation to the existing rules, which is in a way a strict one, so that if they send certain indexation rule that pensions are indexed only to prices and not to wages, for instance, then they stick to that very, very firmly, while it can be that exactly in this respect it is not a sort of politically sustainable assumption. Another factor, this is more speculation, just you are students and you should study these things much more closely than what I'm doing. But it just comes to my mind because I happen to know colleagues here and there that people in social security ministries may be quite happy if a projection is not so big increase in the pension expenditures or other aging-related expenditures. Then they can say that, okay, this is not a problem. We don't need to change any policies. So they can be happy with the projections which show a moderate decline. But of course, we objective experts, we should not accept any of these sort of biases, but we should challenge any assumption. As a summary of based on these projections, so we have, say, two main types of problems. In some countries, the expenditure increases seem to be quite high, and it tells that something has to happen. It's not sustainable in any sense. And then there are, for some countries, projections are dubious because they may imply such a decrease in replacement rates that it is not perhaps regarded as politically sustainable. So that means that they have to be checked out more carefully. But still, I want to say here that this is the 2006 projection round is the best comprehensive source on these matters in Europe. And there is a lot of material. The reports are thick. So, and of course everything available on the web. So it's something that one has to know if one looks seriously into this, even though, as I point out, there are always questions about the reliability or even in some cases usefulness. But anyway, if one seriously looks into these questions, one has to know what these reports are. And next year, spring next year, the coming report is certainly equally important to be checked out. Summary of pension reforms, which are, by the way, also in a way detailed in those reports, so that one finds basic information on pension systems and their reforms in various countries. Well, here, of course, I have to remind you that the data is roughly from 2004 in those reports which were published in 2006. So various things have, of course, already happened in various countries. So it's not necessarily that you find the updated information in these reports. But anyway, these are good. This is good material to start with. I don't go into details, but having one can look at these pension reforms reported in those our reports more carefully, and one can see that again that there are quite big differences. Second conclusion, just a second. Right, okay. One first, serious pension reforms have barely started in some member states. That's one thing. And then there are many issues which have to be faced when thinking about comprehensive pension reforms. And now I come to the Swedish reform. Briefly, they installed what is in the literature called notional defined contribution system, the basic being that the contribution rate is fixed, and then one establishes rules that the expenditure then adjusts according to the demographic factors. And this is something useful to think about also for other countries. It makes, in a way, sure that the system is sustainable. There are incentives for people to postpone retirement because otherwise their pension benefits would be too low. So this is exactly what should happen as their longevity increases. Now the warning is that in Sweden, preparation of this major pension reform for the first pillar public pensions, it took 15 years to prepare. Many other countries don't have these 15 years. Also, second point, the Swedish pension system was partially funded before this, so that there were certain sort of funds which could be transferred to the new pension system in order to overcome some transitional difficulties. And those funds don't exist in many countries. So this is a warning that it's not so simple that one could just copy what was done in Sweden. Of course, one has to tailor-made it for any other country. I'm finishing, Thierry, and just this final slide is related to the situation of today. Well, I tend to think that the financial crisis of this autumn should not be a pretext for not looking into the long-term issues. One has to have a good analysis of the long term. Now, today it happens that we don't even know what the initial conditions are for public finances. We shall only see in a few years what debt levels or whatever there will be for the United States and European countries. So therefore there is uncertainty about the initial conditions as well. But that is not a reason not to look at the long term. We have to have a good look both at the initial conditions and learn and see how this goes. We have to have a good analysis of the long term, and they make together what we call medium-term objectives for economic policy, for government finances, which is then the 4 to 5 year perspective, which the governments should have clear in their minds when they are setting their annual budgets. Thank you.
So the floor is open to questions, and if students want to talk first, that would be well appreciated. Are you a student?
Dr. Campbell, my name. Can I just ask you a theoretical question? And you can answer it equally theoretically. I mean, if the question of pensions were a community competence rather than a competence of the member states, as you described it to be, how much more effectively do you think that the EU could deal with this issue? You won't be quoted on this, so you can say whatever you want.
Shall I collect or shall I?
No, you can.
Right. It's a very hypothetical question. No, but I can't even imagine what the answer could be. It's so clear that the European Union is how it has developed. Social affairs belongs to the member states. They have the budget. That would trigger all type of questions of fiscal federalism, having a budget of 40% of GDP at the European Union level. We are not going to see that in 300 years.
If there's no other student, I'll be a student.
Okay.
My question sort of follows up, and it was when you showed us those two very interesting slides. Sorry, my name is Amy Brown from the University of Florida. You have very interesting slides on the one hand on where the EU has some competence regarding things like indirect taxes, obstructions to things that pensions could do. At the same time, you had mentioned about stability roadmaps. I wanted to put the general question and these two things together and ask you the question sort of again. When I think about what are obstacles in the European Union in which pensions play a role towards further integration, I always think of highly mobile people collecting bits and pieces of professional experience in different countries. And that most of the pension schemes, in fact, reward people staying with one employer over a very long period of time, particularly in one country. And a lot of the privatized pension schemes or even public pension schemes don't really address that. And when people take things to court, the European Court of Justice often says there are some of these schemes that are just not favorable to people moving around. So that's one of those areas where I think pensions and European Court come together. My second connection to this is, what has the EU done in your view regarding pensions and stability roadmap? We had the stability roadmap reform, and there was some space allowed for flexibility. At the same time, my understanding of the reforms were that the EU or Commission encouraged member states to include much more carefully a reflection on what they're doing with pension reforms in order to maybe make it appeal to more flexibility. And that way also sort of maneuvers pensions and pension reform into EU domains. Maybe you can bring those together and reflect.
Right. Right. Yeah. On your first. So, as you say, European Union has a role from the point of view of the internal market. It wants to guarantee portability of all pensions, both from the public pensions and the private occupational pensions, and this is never perfect, and there is ongoing work. One thing which now comes to my mind when you ask the question is, of course, that should we see a development such that the public pension pillar would provide sort of a lower level of basic pensions than currently in many European member states, and the occupational pensions would then top up that. And then, especially regarding the mobile workers, it is important that the occupational pension pillar is such that there are no obstacles to move across member states. This is exactly what is done on this, under this quite fresh directive on the occupational pension funds, which is now, which should be implemented by now in one, more or less in the member states. So that is a directive which is important, as it is the basic for setting up a European occupational pension fund where appropriate. And that would then, of course, solve the issue of portability. That is the aim of it. So all this is very important, and of course, I must say, of course, it is linked to the big macro issues as well, because one could say that if there is something which is developing well in the second pillar, then that gives sort of more, say, it gives more room for, say, bluntly saying, cutting the first pillar pensions, if these two develop at the same time, so that one grows and then the other one can perhaps be reduced in order to have something decent as a whole. Your second question, how all this is now taken on board under the revised Stability and Growth Pact. This is, I think, more or less what was your question. That is my paper tomorrow. And it's really interesting issue and a hot potato on the table. It is currently in the committees. There is no consensus yet how it is going to be resolved, but just for those who didn't yet have time to look into every detail of Stability and Growth Pact, when it was revised in 2005, this one thing, how the medium-term objectives will be set, taking into account the implicit liabilities. It was left open in 2005 because the ministers did not have yet in 2005 the necessary analysis to make good decisions. It was explicitly said that they asked Commission to prepare proposals for that. And this is exactly what is now happening. And it is open. There are proposals. There are proposals which I myself find not good enough. And I make comments, even in my paper, to be presented tomorrow, how to look at this and how to improve. So we shall see whether the ministers are going to learn from my paper next year.
Is there any discussion between the EU and the United States on pension plans, Social Security? Can either side of the pond learn from the other?
Surely one could, sure. I can't give any sort of very concrete ones. Of course, certainly they are not on the table to negotiate about. Well, I don't exclude that there could be something on portability or that type of issues, but you didn't mean that. You meant more generally. No, I don't think so. I've been trying to follow a little bit the discussion in the States concerning the Feldstein's proposals on personal accounts, what is his terminology, and all that debate, and Peter Diamond and everybody participating. Of course, that debate is in principle quite relevant for any country, and vice versa. But the main, well, I come back, but the main difference is that the pension system in Europe is twice as big as in the States.
Follow up what you were saying, that in the United States, you would make no parametric changes at all. The 50-year forecast out to 2050 is still only about 60% of GDP going to our public pension program, Social Security program. Our real problem is medical care for the elderly, which is likely to occupy 16% or more of GDP even long before that.
Sure.
Is there something going on in Europe parallel to that?
Yeah, I'm very grateful for this point, and certainly I should have mentioned it, but that the other population aging related public expenditures on top of pensions, they are very, very important and even more difficult in a way to tackle. And of course these projections I was talking about, and even the numbers which I showed. No, I only showed the numbers on pensions. No, that I think that's what I did. But of course the reports I referred to, they cover the other population aging related expenditures as well, and that is true. They can be even more difficult problems. Yeah, for the reason that with pensions you can sort of make more clear-cut rules, and then you set up a system which is perhaps partly sort of automatically adjusts to exogenous factors. That can be not too difficult to handle if there is the political will and understanding that it has to be done. But with medical care, you have all type of problems with which are uncertain. How are all these expenditures determined? What is the moral hazard in various places in these systems? That is really often much more difficult. And these are important expenditure items, and probably their growth is equally big as the growth of pensions. So I appreciate that this issue came up, as I perhaps didn't emphasize it sufficiently.
I'm curious because your slides with the projections for the member states go up to 2050, but so I assume that that's the data that the Commission works off of in writing policy. But obviously, the European Union in 2050 is going to look very different from the European Union today. So if they're writing policy for the medium term, when they create that policy, do they take into account the possibility of accession or further integration or redistribution of competences? Or do they write it as if everything is going to be?
Well, these projections are made on the basis of continuing current policies. That is how they are defined, and it is a starting point for starting to analyze and think. But of course, it means that then it is a further question to think about what has to be done. And of course, this sort of projection exercise does not go very far to even to ask the questions what should be done. But you see, this is such a big issue already to make something sensible to start with, and one has to invest in making these projections based on this technical assumption of current policies. So the figures are only that, and I emphasize again, one has to remember this. And of course, there can be a communication problem that these figures are used then loosely, and then suddenly people tend to think that they are somehow good forecasts, which they are not, because they are based on technical assumptions to start a good analysis.
So what I'm going to take from the presentation is, and when you were talking, I saw actually some unsaid sentences, and maybe I'm wrong, and maybe because you are from the European Commission, so you cannot really say it. So what I'm going to take actually from the talk is, okay, we have these projections, they are bad. So it's bad news for the public finances in Europe. However, well, or on top of that, actually, the assumptions are very strict, and it's going to be worse. So we have these numbers actually for 2050, which are most likely incorrect, and it's going to be worse. We should tell, and actually who is responsible for implementing the policies? It's the member states. But since it took 15 years in Sweden, with good assumptions actually 15 years ago to do the reforms, what I take actually that, well, it's too late. So because the member states, I mean, they don't realize how this issue is important, and they don't, and the financial crisis is hitting, so it's going to be all about short term. Angela Merkel wants to be re-elected next year. Sarkozy maybe will want to be re-elected in a couple of years. So I think we are in a big trouble. So at the European Union, please take over. So coming back to the first point, please take over and implement the reforms. Actually, don't let the member states and the political games let the system collapse. So I really cannot answer actually, but this is what I'm going to take home.
I can say what I want.
Okay, good.
I take this as an opportunity to say that I'm in a research department, and you saw that there was a caveat that the views expressed are not those of my employer. This is important. My job is to be in between the academia and the policymakers, and I take it seriously that what I say is my expert opinion, and if it goes against the views of my employer, I say it. Okay. Yes, all this exactly the relevant conclusions from all these aspects. So the one now a loose projection is that no, there are not going to be a sort of well-designed pension reforms early enough because it is too difficult, too little time, which then means that there will be a crisis at some point, and that is a crisis of public finances, and then there will be cuts in pensions, in payments, whatever, cuts in accrued pension rights. If that happens, that is what I mean with a crisis. That can certainly happen, as the alternative would be what? A default of the government for its debts, which, by the way, has not happened in Western Europe or in the United States. So I think we still tend to think that the governments will not default their debts. But then, before that happens, they will then do something, but it can be a crisis for the pensions. Well, talking to people at the age of most of you, the young ones, they tend to think that that they already understand that their retirement age is not going to be 63 or anything what it is roughly now in various countries. But they think that these pension systems are not going to be sustainable, and they will have to face when the time comes to work longer. This is in a way a natural implication, and it can be that those under 35 today, they can accept it because this is natural. But it would be useful if the governments could be a little bit more clear about government policies, so that people could already start preparing for the outcome, which is going to be worse pensions than the pensions of today, so that they can then voluntarily also prepare. Perhaps also by saving, but not only by preparing to work longer. But these are the two things which individuals can do.
Well, the last one, actually.
Well, in Japan, at least the last time I studied it, the highest unemployment rate was among men 65 and older. That large numbers of Japanese men would like to continue working after mandatory retirement, and their employers don't want to hire them.
Right.
Is that a problem in Europe?
Probably it's not a problem because the desire to work longer is not there. But this is endogenous partly, or mainly perhaps endogenous, because the public pension systems provide, still today, a decent pension. So why should people even consider? But in Japan, isn't it that there are other reasons that they do so? They don't want to stay at home.
True. And the pensions are low.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.